Okay, so today we're going to be annotating the Declaration of Independence. I copied this out of your We the People textbook. Your sub is going to be able to pause the video anytime that she needs to if you guys have questions or it's going too fast. But this seemed easier than typing an explanation of how I wanted it annotated. So this is the Declaration of Independence. Under Setting the Stage, it says, on July 4th, 1776, does that date sound familiar to anybody? July 4th? It should. We celebrate July 4th, right? Barbecues, fireworks. This is the 4th of July. It's because of the Declaration of Independence. That's the day it was signed. The Second Continental Congress adopted what became one of America's most cherished documents. Written by Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence voiced the reasons for separating from Britain and provided the principles of government upon which the United States would be built. Okay, I'm going to have her pause at this point, and you guys are going to listen to some other people read through the entirety. Please read along with them as they read the Declaration of Independence. All right, hopefully that was enjoyable and you weren't too distracted by trying to figure out who all those celebrities were. So the Declaration of Independence is split up into different parts. The first one is the preamble, which is just like an introduction to the Declaration of Independence. Okay, this is going to be our introduction. And the word in here that people really focus on, that they think is really important, is this word right here, necessary. It says, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them. That necessary word, that means this has to happen. This isn't a choice, what the colonists are doing breaking away from Great Britain, right? It must happen. It's not a choice. These founders felt that what they were doing was necessary. And then there's the second part here, which is interesting, the laws of nature. Does that sound a lot like something we've been studying? Hopefully you turn that around a little bit, and they are referring to natural laws, right? Or natural rights. Those are interchangeable. So they're talking here about the laws of nature, meaning that there are certain things that the government cannot take away from people. Hopefully you guys remember what those three things are. And it goes on to say, a decent respect for the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So a decent respect, they're being respectful here, right? Not just respectful of the king, not just respectful of Parliament, but respectful to the opinions of mankind, everyone in the world, right? To be respectful, they need to declare the causes which impel them to the separation. They are going to explain themselves. We will explain our reasons, right? These founders who wrote this are saying, following in this document, what we're going to do next is explain why we have to, why it is necessary that we break away from England and become a separate nation with a separate government. All right, again, pause anytime. So the next section, the rights of the people to control their government. This part, here we had the introduction. Now, this part is going to explain the ideals. Okay. What are the ideas of a perfect world, right? The ideals that these people have, that the founders have, that are leading them to the conclusion that they can no longer be a part of Great Britain. And there's some really, really important stuff in here, stuff that we've been studying as I've made you look at the philosophy behind the American Revolution. So these might be the most famous words in here. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Okay, let's stop there for just a second, because this is really interesting. All men are created equal. Think back to this time period. Is everybody created equal? Maybe think for a minute, who is not treated as equally as other people? We've looked at, obviously, women, right? People who don't own land aren't allowed to vote during this time period. Slaves are not treated as equal as everybody else, right? Much less equal, in fact. So all men are created equal. Is that true? It's a pretty lofty goal for the time period that we're talking about, right? Is he really just talking about white men? All right, all men are created equal, that they are endowed, notice down here it means provided, okay? They are provided by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Creator's capitalized, so here we mean God. So they're provided by God with certain unalienable rights, things that can't be taken away. Rights that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That should sound very familiar to you because two of those were also ideas of John Locke. They are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What is he talking about right here? He's talking about natural rights. Again, only now he's being more specific. Natural rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We can have a longer conversation when I get back about why he didn't say life, liberty, and property, because obviously he was pulling from some of the ideas of John Locke. That's something that people have questioned and talked about for a long time. It's an interesting question. Okay, then it says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their power, their just powers, from the consent of the governed. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This is another thing that we talked about, right? This is called, man, in my notes I have it marked as purpose of government, but now I want to say, what did we call this? We might have to pause and go back and look at my notes. All right, I had to go back and look at my notes. So when we say that they derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, we're talking about a social contract here, right? So the government gets their power from the people agreeing to be governed by that government, right? So it's a social contract. They get their powers from the consent of the governed. That when any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. The people have the power here. Government gets its power from where? From the people. All right, now I want you to pull out your highlighter and we're going to really carefully make sure that it's very, very clear where these Enlightenment philosophies are, where these ideas of John Locke are, okay? So we have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which are given by the Creator, right? They are God-given rights. Those are our natural rights. I'll even do endowed. They're endowed by the Creator. We have the social contract here, right? Deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed is our social contract. The right of the people to alter or abolish their government is that government gets its power from the people. So here you have these big ideas that we've been talking about in class, and they are included here in this really important document from 1776. All right, so after the people abolish their government, they have the right to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. Okay, so this should not happen all the time. Governments long established should not be changed for light or transient causes. This is serious business. This is a serious situation. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they were accustomed. So people tend to just stay under a tyrant rather than have a revolution because they're scared, mostly because they're scared of dying and what might happen, right? But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, unjust seizures of power, abuses and these unjust seizures of power, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. Okay, so what they're talking about here is the king has become a tyrant, right, with absolute power. It is their right, the people's right. It is their duty. Here we have it again, that word necessary first, and now the word duty, right? It is their right, is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future and security. When the ruler becomes a despot or a tyrant, it is their right and their duty to throw off such government. So right here, we see their justification, the people's right to revolution. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former. Again, that word necessity, right? They're saying this is not a choice that we're taking. This is something that must be done. Which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny above these states. So what has been going on in the colonies? Now they're talking about that whole timeline that you guys just looked at, starting in 1763. So it's been 13 years, right? That history is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having a direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. So the king has not been doing the job that the government is supposed to do, which is protecting natural rights. of his people. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. So Jefferson's writing, I'm going to list for you all the ways in which the king has been a tyrant. And now the next part of this assignment is going to get explained to you, and you are going to be searching through the list of complaints that the founders wrote about to try to see if you can pull out some specific events that you studied last week in history. Have fun with it. All right, I finally figured out how to turn the video the other way. So for those of you that were annoyed that I didn't figure that out the first time, I finally figured it out. So you guys just looked over the tyrannical acts of the British king. This section is where the complaints are, right? Oops, except for I can't write. Complaints. So we have the preamble or the introduction, then we have the ideals, then we have the complaints, and so you guys hopefully took some notes on some of these complaints that you can relate back to historical events that you had studied. And then once the complaints are over, then we have this section called Efforts of the Colonies to Avoid Separation, and that's still technically part of the complaints. It's saying, okay, here's all the things the king did, and this is how we responded to those events. So then, of course, like any good paper, you need a conclusion, right? So this last part here is going to be the conclusion. So we've got, we therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, and this is actually the first time in a major document we see these words, United States of America. That's going to become the name of our country. In General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. Rectitude, moral uprightness. So they feel like they are in the moral right here. Do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare. Here we go. They're writing it down and they are speaking it out to people that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, and that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connections between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. This is the breakup right here. This is where they're saying we're broken up. And that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. So they're no longer going to allow Great Britain to govern them. They are going to govern themselves. And then you have the signers. For the support of this declaration, and with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, meaning God, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. They pledge to each other their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And this was treason. So by signing this document, if all didn't go well, these men were going to be caught and killed, most likely, for trying to incite a revolution against the British government. So there's some people on this list, if you look at it for a minute, that you might recognize. I just want you to put a check mark next to names that maybe you've seen before. So pause this for a minute. Let table groups figure out who they know. Some of the ones that might look familiar, John Hancock is remembered because he signed so largely. So he has that really big signature on there. You can't tell from this list though. Thomas Jefferson, right, was the main writer of this document. Benjamin Rush, some of you might recognize his name. He's a character in Fever, right? Benjamin Rush is from Fever. One of the doctors, Dr. Rush. Benjamin Franklin is a very famous character that people remember a lot of times. Samuel Adams, John Adams' brother, John Adams right there. Sorry, John Adams' cousin, Samuel Adams. You'll notice that George Washington does not sign this. He was from Virginia, and so he would be a signer from Virginia, but he was not there because he was leading the Continental Army at the time up in Massachusetts. Some of you might recognize some other names from previous research that you've done. All right, everybody, thanks for listening. I'll see you in a couple days.